What would the benefit be for someone who is currently going to physio to use WeStretch at home?
So primary benefit in that case would be that physiotherapy, for the most part, looks at the specific issue that a person is dealing with, and we try to structure any of our workouts, any of our work on that specific issue, which means that if you sprained your ankle, we're leaving out your knees, your hips, your shoulders, your back, your neck. So it helps supplement kind of physiotherapy, but not taking away the time that we need to spend on your specific problem, but still catching the general health of the whole body.
And what if someone came to you for a sprained ankle? Would it hurt them, be indifferent, or help them if they went to the app and chose just right ankle, which would be all 26 combinations of degrees?
So
when should they do it or not do it, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so there would be a net benefit overall because most rehab programs are not taking a person to their training ceiling. So adding in a little bit more complexity will help you, in some ways help us by streamlining where still issues are occurring or exist. So if you're finding that, hey, when I do this specific rotation, I've still got some restriction, that's perfect because then we can go back and train that specifically. But truth be told, if we're doing our job really well, we shouldn't have any of those unknowns. So it would bump up your treatment a little bit, but shouldn't add anything, but it would not hurt anything.
What would the benefit be for someone who is not in need of physio to use WeStretch? So they're not hurting anywhere.
Yeah, so the big thing there would be early identification of potential issues. So if you're unaware but slowly losing range of motion in one of your joints, it could lead into you asking early questions about, hey, why does this joint feel tight? Which could help you divert having to get an issue there. But tightness, soreness, without kind of the need for pain, which would indicate the need for allied health, whether it's physio, chiro, massage, you could kind of early route it out. So be like, hey, my knee's feeling a little bit stiff. And if you work on that specifically, you might be able to loosen it up without kind of slowly getting worse enough that then you need that external help. And the other thing is just making sure your body stays fresh and healthy, because most of us, through the routines of our day and our activities, simply don't get really well-rounded programs. If you're a runner, your choice is to run and you typically don't do anything else. If you like to do CrossFit, that's what you do, and you don't typically have time to do anything else. So all of us have areas of our health that typically we do well and areas that we don't. So when it comes down to our body, having a program that kind of strips away all that expectation is just, hey, let's just cover all of our bases, covers them. It does well to just kind of anything you're missing, it captures.
Do you recommend daily stretching?
Depends on the population. I think that everyone can benefit from daily movement or activity is probably the way that I would kind of go with it. Well, actually, how would I want to say this? Because if someone asked me specifically, should I stretch daily? I probably wouldn't use that terminology. Do you need to move daily? Do you need to be active daily? Yes. But within that parameters, I would expect a person to move through as many ranges of movement as they could, or as many degrees of freedom, and I'd expect them to take those movements to end range, which is stretching. I probably just wouldn't use that terminology from some of the bias that word has taken in. So if someone was asking me in the purest form, should I stretch daily? There's other elements of health behaviors that could be more important for that person. So hitting the 150 minutes of aerobic activity per week, doing the twice per week strengthening, those are critical to a person's health. But in that, you should be getting some stretching in there. So I'd say kind of my simple answer, if someone asked me, it would probably be no, but the recommendations I would give them would actually be concurrent or be exclusive to, yeah, we should be going through movements at end range, which is stretching.
How important is stretching? But can you define what you call as stretching?
Okay, perfect. So in terms of stretching, to me, is taking, usually regarding a joint or a tissue, to the end of its range and holding some tension in it. Now, in terms of the importance, the things that does for the human body in terms of maintaining and restoring range of motion, promoting blood flow, those things are vitally important, and even getting that tension into the tissue helps biologically stimulate tissue growth, repair, and restoration. So it's vitally important for basically any joint that you expect to work throughout your lifetime, to be doing it in some capacity. And for the most part, more is better. When we talk about intensity or duration, if you can get more time and more attention to a certain ceiling limit, which is different for everyone, your tissue will continue to develop and improve in its structural resilience doing that. So it's vitally important.
Someone going to the end range of motion, maximum tension and a long hold time is not where people should start either. You want...
Yes, no, and yeah, absolutely. So when we're looking at tissue resilience, if you think of it a little bit like tanning, you don't try generally to tan all the way in the first day. If you go to Mexico, usually you got a pre-tan, right? So if you want to have your tissues to be really good, strong, and resilient, unfortunately it takes time and work. So if you're starting off early in a program and you're not doing regular physical activities, it's important to start really slow and gradually build in your tolerance to these things, the same way that we would for tanning. So if I wanted to say like go shirtless, the amount of time I can spend in the sun without any protection here is totally different than what I can expect to spend in the sun here. The skin just does not have the training to actually handle that amount of sun load, if you will. So if you're used to stretching out your lower body because you're a runner, for instance, you can't expect to take that same intensity and that same duration into the upper body where you're not as trained and expect your tissue to do as well.
So that is one of the major benefits of WeStretch is we start and we methodically increase
exactly and
time and tension.
Part of the thing that you guys have done that I really like is that you've made it mindless on the participant's part. So even if I wanted to do a program with all my knowledge, it takes a fair bit of brain power to kind of try to isolate these things, but with WeStretch you plug it in, and because of the way that the formulas work, you don't have that same mental fatigue trying to go through everything. You just run it and you go.
Who benefits the most from stretching?
So the individual or the groups that will benefit the most for stretching are the deconditioned individuals. So the people who are not currently performing any type of physical activity at all. The group that I would be probably most concerned with right off the top of my head would be our older adults and our inactive youth. And mainly because these individuals, a lot of times that barrier to movement, if a person's concerned about the way that they look, if they're concerned about going to the gym because it's just filled with young people, it's an easy way of introducing movement, activity, exercise, load and load management to these populations in a very safe, comfortable way, because they're not in front of prying eyes, they can go at their own speed, but they're still getting a program that's built on a really solid foundation of science that can help them progress. So the people who are probably most illiterate regarding their physical health, this kind of shortens that curve or shortens that distance for them to kind of get up to speed.
And what would be some serendipity benefits or added bonus for athletes?
So yeah, so if we go to the kind of the group that would probably at kind of a simple thought be the least likely group to promote this to or to benefit from. So if you're thinking like elite athletes where they're getting tons of physical activity, unfortunately a lot of that physical activity is going to be promoting into specific sports. So they're getting lots in certain areas and not enough to kind of supplement or kind of balance their programs out. And because most of their movements are goal oriented, they're not kind of internally focusing. So their risks of injury are higher. So having that kind of time to be mindful about their movement and really break down so they're not just throwing a ball, but they're taking their shoulder through all their ranges, elbow through all the ranges, gives them moments to be thoughtful, but more importantly, feel what their body's doing so they can, again, early kind of head off injuries if they're coming their way, or just get a sense of how their body's handling their training. So there's that added benefit, not necessarily because we expect the stretching to increase their tissue resilience, but giving them more of a sense of how are my tissues doing. So almost more of that mind-body connection that unfortunately as an athlete, you typically don't get a lot of because you're so focused on, hey, what are my splits when I'm running? Or how hard did I hit the ball? Or did I get that bump to go the right way? Did I sink my shot? You really don't have that time to internalize how your body is going through movement.
And cool down. Benefits, is it real in your mind, fake, like lactic acid, the stiffness part?
So real in the mind, yes. Like, we do know that the body does have a post-exercise increase in its oxygen consumption. We know that blood flow redistribution and chemical imbalances, whether it's lactic acid or substance P or some of the other ones that get developed or produced during exercise, there does need to be time to clear those. Your body will naturally do it without doing anything specific, but it's not going to do it quite as efficiently. So having a routine that takes you through these things to help promote blood flow in your key areas, to just help simply flush things out, but also, again, internalizing your movements and seeing how your body's doing after the workout to potentially identify things that you might want to be more aware of, or things that you might want to try to attack in your coming days. It gives you that opportunity to feel things out and kind of just breathe within your system.
Can stretching help reverse the signs of aging?
So for that one, I feel like my brain splits. So will it change some of the biologics of aging? No. Like, people are on a journey towards death from birth, and there's certain things that go on that we really can't quite change. However, most of us live far below our physiological limits, so a person can really turn back the clock if they've been reasonably physically inactive and they start focusing on their activity levels and their diet. They can, one, feel much younger, which is something that is quite common within magazines but also videos online, but a person can actually look a lot younger too. So I think it depends on where we're looking at it. So from a purely biological point of view, many of the things that we see in aging are pretty tight. There's not a lot of change that any activity or diet program can change. But if we're looking at subjectively how a person looks and feels, you can absolutely change that. And there's a lot of value in terms of trying to turn back the clock by doing everything you can to not go quietly into the night, but to really try to maximize your life in terms of its duration, but also the quality that you're able to obtain from it, because bodies that are healthy and resilient and energetic certainly produce, in my own mind, a much better kind of range of activities that you're open to. So if you're wanting to play with grandkids, if you want to go on a big hike, if you want to travel the West Coast and sit in an RV for 6 hours at a time, having a body that can produce those things is vitally important. And activity is one of the most potent things that we have that can actually provide that to people. It's not free, it takes work, but it's the only thing that you really have a chance at. But is it going to change your chronological age? No. Is it going to change some of the factors of aging? No. But it allows you to live kind of your best life at that age.
What information are people missing that would convert them to be regular stretchers?
To me, it would be that long-term thinking. So when we're thinking about stretching, you're sacrificing some time, some effort, some energy, but most of us think of it in that short duration. So what am I going to benefit from my 15 minutes of stretching tonight? Am I going to sleep a bit better? Am I going to wake up a little bit more refreshed? But it's the habit of getting into those things over the long term that I think is probably the bigger barrier for people, is they're thinking too short. Like, yeah, I stretch and I feel better for 30, 40 minutes, maybe the day, but they don't usually comprehend, okay, if I do this consistently, it builds. It's like throwing money in the bank and just letting it sit. It really does help promote better health, resilience, and energy later on in life. So I think most of us, and I think it's just human nature with most things, we just have a problem kind of seeing over the horizon and understanding what are these habits doing for us in the long term.
Why don't people stretch regularly? What's your guess? What's your feel?
If I looked at the research, and again, I don't think it's specific to stretching, but most people will claim that time limitations are their number one barrier to adapting to almost any new health routine. So if I had to guess, time would be the number one thing. but my personal opinion is it's kind of a crap answer. I use it in my own life, but stretching doesn't require really any special equipment, any special location. You can be doing it while watching TV. So really, there is not a good rationale for why a person couldn't be stretching. But if I had to pick one, it would be people feel like they don't have the time to do it. But it's more of a illusion of the fact that a person's busy. They have to get it through their day, and then they just feel fatigued. But legitimately, they could be doing it kind of within the realms of their day, whether they're playing with their kids. Like, the kid would stretch with you. They'd be more than happy to spend time with you doing something like that. So I think it's more of an illusion, but I feel like time is almost always the thing people complain about, or the lack thereof.
Do you just want to talk on the topic of backbends and splits,
Yeah.
and where do they belong?
So to me, that's more of a contextual one towards the individual itself. Not that I've tested this, but I don't know if there's any amount of back bridge stretching I could do that would make me do a back bridge. I don't think that's a part of my genetic gifting that would allow me to do it. Now, would I be fearful of doing that even in a warm-up? No, because my body, even at a cold position, is going to have so much range, and it's going to limit me to it. When I'm looking at those things, the body will naturally put limits on you, partially from a subconscious protective side. So if your body feels unsecure about doing a specific movement, you'll naturally be limited in that. And your body will protect you. The only place where it might, in the very odd cases, you might end up with a person getting a cramp moving into the position or out of it, but the overall risk of injury moving into those positions that we don't often see is really low. And as much as we don't necessarily think about it, even something like picking up a pencil does hurt a certain number of people every year, and it doesn't exclude health status, strength, flexibility. It's just movement is horribly complex, and if your body fires your muscles in the wrong sequence or in the wrong intensity, there's a chance that almost any movement could hurt you. So doing ones that are unfamiliar or closer to that end or further away from your comfort zone, I think the body's natural protective mechanisms secure us away from putting ourselves at risk while doing those things. So I personally wouldn't worry about having them in there, but you're gonna have a whole bunch of people, I think, that are going to feel uncomfortable doing those things if they're unfamiliar with them.
But being slow and controlled in a routine is still relatively safe.
I wouldn't even use the word relative. It is safe. I would not be concerned with even a person with an injury doing it, because if they get that natural gut reaction or as they're moving into it and they're like, something about this doesn't feel right, we know that for ourselves is a point of care and attention that we need to look into. And if we simply can't do it, we simply can't do it. Most of us will not hurt ourselves just moving without any external load or force on us. The body's very, very good at keeping us safe, even if we ourselves are not consciously being attentive to it.
Why don't you have to hold a stretch for a long period of time?
So stretching is actually a really fun area of research because it's very hard to quantify. So when we look at the human body and the biologics of it, so whether it's muscle, tendon, joint capsule, ligaments, you have stretch receptors, tension receptors, force receptors within those tissues that actually detect how much force and how much length change is actually occurring. And the body uses that information to change the biologics of the tissue if you get enough of the inputs in. So when we look at the classic, you need to hold this stretch for 30 seconds. If you go back far enough, a lot of people were even suggesting longer stretches at 60 seconds. It was kind of built under the belief that you needed to hold these things for a long time to produce the movement benefit. What we currently know now is intensity is actually a much bigger driver of that change, and cumulative time within that intensity also is important. So when we compare stretching, 2 stretches of 30 seconds compared to a stretch of 60 seconds, it produces the same results as long as the intensity's held relatively the same. If you compared 4 15-second stretches to a 60-second stretch, as long as your intensities are the same, it promotes the same type of benefit. So the duration of your stretch isn't nearly as important as how much cumulative time you're getting there. And what we typically find is if we shorten the stretch duration, we can bump up that intensity so we can actually get more work done in a shorter period of time.
So when people start out at 1 second, 2 second in our apps philosophy, do you agree, disagree? It's not a race, it's a...
No, definitely not a race. And even within the parameters there, trying to get 1 second, part of it I think is getting somebody familiar with the movement, letting them feel what it's doing. And even at the 1 second, I don't think it's been specifically studied, but I would assume that would have the same net effects on the body itself. Again, if we look at cumulative time, but it also just gets a person moving, and that movement promotes blood flow. So the more movement you're doing versus holding that stretch, there's other physical benefits that happen if you're moving almost continuously 1 second holds versus if you did like a 10 or 15 second hold. So to me, it would change the way the body interprets the movement. You're still gonna get benefits, but the benefits will kind of slightly tweak depending on what exactly you're doing in terms of hold and intensity, but it's not going to erase it or not work. It's just which things are you really promoting versus which things are kind of secondarily being pushed along.
And interesting that one of our test cases who's been doing stretching for a year has not reached any of the 7 second holds in repeated 6 times yet. So less than 7 seconds a hold, but done 6 times in a routine, went from he could barely touch his knees when he went to bend over, and now he's like, I can touch my toes, straight legs and everything, no cheating. But so, in our own unscientific research, the 1 second to 3 second holds has made...
Yeah,
does that surprise you, or does that make sense?
Not in the least. And part of it, like, as much as we'd like to think that our range of motion is a structural determinant of our health, we know that actually range of motion involves the confidence that we have within the movement pattern. We know it has to do with the body's belief in what a person can do. So if you're doing multiple repeats of a movement, in theory at least, your brain should be becoming more confident in your abilities to do it. So it's going to give you almost like more slack or play. So in terms of an example that I can think of, like if you were pushing a pen into your arm, trying to find the limit of what your skin could take before it broke, with each repeated bout of it, you're kind of find out, well, at this amount of force, the skin didn't break. So you get the confidence that I can push that hard before my skin occurs any kind of damage. So you'll actually see in your repeated attempts that you'd be slowly ramping up the amount of force. And if you took it to its end, you'd find the limit of what skin could take against that style of pen. So if you're stretching forward and you feel a certain amount of force go through your body, your initial limit might be, yeah, that feels uncomfortable. That's as far as I'm willing to go. Because your body's going to leave you a bit of protective buffer. But as you repeat it over and over and over again, even if we're not doing kind of the classic long holds, you're getting kind of that mental subconscious confidence boost, allowing you to access more of your structural range while you're getting end range movement in the tissues. That's also promoting lengthening of the tissues, but also an increase in resilience. So yeah, it makes perfect sense that would occur. And I would probably say if you guys looked more into your data, you'd probably actually see more of that even at these really relatively low durations, you'll see people substantially increasing the range of motion. And it depends a little bit on the individual and how relatively inactive and stiff they are for their genetic ability. But everyone should be improving even with those reasonably light durations, because your system's just getting more competent in its actual abilities.
And with the lower hold times, especially early on, reduced chance of injury?
Exactly. So yeah, when we're looking at and again, if we went to tanning, if you were going to try to increase your base tan and you decided that you were going to go, say, 15-minute increments, you're still tanning, but your risk of burning goes down more so than if you wanted to do like a 30-minute increment or a 60-minute increment. So you're lowering that overall risk to kind of nudge that benefit along, but you'll still get the benefit without kind of that higher risk. So the harder you're pushing the tissue initially, the more likely you are approaching its limit, and at that limit is where you'd see your injuries. So slowing things down lowers your risk of injury, but does not necessarily put you in an area where you're not going to benefit.